There's a particular kind of pain that comes from losing someone who is still alive. Not through death, which carries its own profound grief, but through the ending of a relationship, a friendship, or a connection that once felt essential to who you are. They're out there somewhere, living their life, possibly not thinking about you at all, and yet they occupy a space in your mind so constant, so consuming, that it feels like you're carrying them with you everywhere you go. You wake up and they're your first thought. You go about your day and something, a song, a place, a random memory, brings them flooding back. You lie in bed at night replaying conversations, analyzing what went wrong, imagining different outcomes, wondering if they ever think about you the way you think about them. The rational part of your brain knows you need to move on. The rest of you has no idea how. If you're listening to this, you know this feeling intimately. You've tried to let go. You've told yourself it's over, that dwelling on it changes nothing, that you need to focus on the future. And yet, here you are, months or maybe years later, still caught in the gravitational pull of someone who is no longer a part of your life. Still haunted by what was, what could have been, or what you wish had been different. This audiobook is not going to tell you that letting go is easy, or that there's a simple trick to stop thinking about someone. There isn't. What it will do is help you understand why this is so hard, what's actually happening in your brain and heart when you can't let go, and most importantly, how to move through this in a way that honors what you felt while still reclaiming your life from the grip of someone who's gone. The pain you're feeling is real, and it's not a sign of weakness or emotional dysfunction. Attachment is fundamental to human psychology. When we form deep connections with others, our brains literally rewire themselves around those relationships. The neural pathways that formed during thousands of interactions, the chemical bonds created by shared experiences, the identity you built that included this person, none of that disappears just because the relationship ended. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, trying to maintain connections it believes are essential to your survival and well-being. Research on attachment and loss shows that the end of a significant relationship activates the same brain regions as physical pain. The same neural circuitry that fires when you touch a hot stove fires when you experience social rejection or loss. This is why heartbreak doesn't just hurt emotionally, and it hurts physically. The ache in your chest, the heaviness in your body, the exhaustion that has nothing to do with lack of sleep. These are not metaphors. They are your body processing real pain. Understanding this helps remove one layer of suffering, the judgment you might be placing on yourself for not being over it yet. There's no timeline for grief. There's no schedule that says you should be fine by now. Some losses take weeks to process. Others take years. The intensity and duration depend on the depth of the connection, the circumstances of the ending, how much of your identity was intertwined with theirs, and whether the loss came with closure or was left raw and unresolved. What we're going to explore over the next 10 chapters is not a formula for forgetting someone or erasing what you felt. You cannot unsee someone who mattered. You cannot unfeel love or connection once it's been experienced. What you can do, and what this audiobook will help you do, is change your relationship to the loss, to process the grief rather than suppress it, to understand what you're actually missing versus what you've idealized, to break the thought patterns that keep you stuck, to forgive when forgiveness serves you, and ultimately to build a life that's rich and meaningful enough that this person becomes a chapter in your story rather than the story itself. Letting go is not about stopping all feeling. It's about reaching a place where the thought of this person doesn't derail your day, where you can acknowledge what they meant without being consumed by their absence, where you can remember the good without being destroyed by the fact that it's over. It's about reclaiming your mental and emotional space so that you're living your actual life rather than a half-life shadowed by someone who's gone. This work is not linear. You will have days where you feel like you've turned a corner, followed by days where the grief hits you fresh and raw again. That's not regression. That's how healing works. It comes in waves, not in straight lines. The goal is not to stop having feelings about this person. The goal is to stop being controlled by those feelings. Over the chapters ahead, will examine the psychology of why letting go is so difficult, the actual nature of what you're grieving, how to interrupt the thought loops that keep you stuck, how to distinguish between genuine loss and idealized fantasy, how to take back your mental space, what time does and doesn't heal, how to rediscover yourself outside of this relationship, the role of forgiveness, how to build a life that moves forward, and finally, how to carry the memory of what was without being imprisoned by it. You will get through this, not because the pain isn't real or because this person didn't matter, but because you are more than this loss. You are more than this relationship. You are more than the grief that currently feels like it defines you. And on the other side of this process, and there is another side, is a version of you that has integrated this experience, learned from it, and become stronger and more whole because of it, not in spite of it. Let's begin the work of letting go. Chapter 1. Why letting go is so hard. The psychology of attachment. To understand why you can't stop thinking about someone, you need to understand attachment, not as a romantic concept, but as a fundamental neurobiological process that shapes how humans form and maintain relationships from birth until death. Attachment theory, developed by psychologist John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, explains how early relationships with caregivers create internal working models that shape all future relationships. But attachment isn't just about childhood. Every significant relationship you form throughout your life creates neurological patterns, chemical bonds, and psychological frameworks that organize how you see yourself and the world. When you form a deep connection with someone, several things happen in your brain. First, your reward system becomes activated every time you think about them, see them, or interact with them. The neurotransmitter dopamine floods your system, creating feelings of pleasure and motivation. This is the same chemical involved in addiction, which is why the early stages of love can feel like a high you can't get enough of. Your brain learns to associate this person with reward, pleasure, and well-being. Second, oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is released during physical touch, emotional intimacy, and shared positive experiences. Oxytocin creates feelings of trust, safety, and attachment. It's what makes you feel calm in their presence, what makes you crave their comfort when you're stressed, what makes their absence feel like something essential is missing. This chemical bonding is powerful and evolutionarily ancient. It exists because humans are social creatures who survived by forming tight-knit groups and pair bonds. Third, your identity begins to incorporate this person. Research in social psychology shows that in close relationships, the boundaries between self and other become blurred. You start to define yourself partly in relation to them. Your plans include them. Your future has them in it. Your sense of who you are becomes interwoven with who they are and who you are together. This is called self-expansion, and it's one of the reasons relationships feel so enriching. You literally become more than you were alone, but this expansion creates vulnerability. When the relationship ends, you don't just lose the other person. You lose the version of yourself that existed in relation to them. You lose the future you imagined. You lose the identity you built that included them. This is why breakups can feel like an identity crisis, because in a very real sense, they are. Part of who you were is gone, and you're left trying to figure out who you are without them. There's also the pattern of intermittent reinforcement at work in many relationships that are hard to let go of. If the relationship was inconsistent, periods of intense connection followed by withdrawal, cycles of closeness and distance, hot and cold behavior, your brain became trained on what psychologists call a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. This is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The unpredictability of the reward makes the seeking behavior stronger and more persistent. You keep reaching out, keep hoping, keep checking, because sometimes it works, and your brain remembers those times more vividly than all the times it didn't. When a relationship ends, especially one that mattered deeply, your attachment system goes into distress. The brain experiences this as a threat to survival because evolutionarily, losing your primary attachment figure meant vulnerability, isolation, and danger. Your body responds with the same stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, that would be released if you were facing a physical threat. This is why anxiety, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, and physical pain are common after loss. Your nervous system is in survival mode. The protest phase is often the first response to loss. You reach out, you try to fix it, you replay what went wrong looking for the moment where a different choice could have saved things. You fantasize about reconciliation. This is your attachment system doing exactly what it's designed to do, trying to restore the bond. When the bond cannot be restored, many people get stuck in this phase, cycling between hope and despair, unable to accept that it's truly over. Then there's the psychological concept of unfinished business. If the relationship ended without closure, if things were left unsaid, if you never got answers to your questions, if the ending was abrupt or ambiguous, your brain struggles to file it away. The mind seeks completion. Open loops create persistent rumination because your brain keeps trying to close them. This is why you rehearse conversations you'll never have. Imagine scenarios where you get to say what you didn't get to say, that you obsessively analyze what happened, trying to make sense of something that might not have a satisfying explanation. Your attachment style also influences how you experience loss and how hard it is to let go. People with anxious attachment tend to experience more intense distress after breakups and struggle more with letting go because their attachment system is hyperactivated. They're more sensitive to perceived abandonment and more desperate to restore connection. People with avoidant attachment might appear to move on quickly, but often haven't actually processed the loss. They've just suppressed it. People with secure attachment can grieve fully and move forward more readily because they have a stable internal sense of self and trust that they can form new connections. Understanding all of this doesn't make the pain go away, but it does something equally important. It helps you see that your struggle to let go is not a personal failing. It's your brain doing what brains do when they lose something they were wired to preserve. The intensity of your grief is proportional to the depth of your attachment. If letting go is hard, it's because the connection mattered. That's not weakness. That's evidence of your capacity to love and connect deeply. The challenge now is to redirect that capacity toward healing rather than toward someone who is no longer available. Chapter 2. The grief nobody talks about. Understanding what you're actually losing. When people talk about getting over someone, they often treat it as a single loss. You lost the person. But that's not accurate. When a significant relationship ends, you're actually grieving multiple losses simultaneously. And understanding what those losses are helps explain why the pain is so complex and why simple solutions don't work. The first and most obvious loss is the person themselves. Their physical presence, their voice, their laugh, the specific way they existed in the world. You can no longer call them when something good happens. You can't turn to them for comfort when things are hard. They're not there across the table at breakfast or beside you in bed at night. This absence is concrete and immediate, and your body notices it every day in 1,000 small ways. But you're also grieving the loss of the future you imagined with them, the plans you made, the life you thought you were building together. Maybe it was marriage, children, growing old together. Maybe it was smaller. Next summer's trip, moving in together, meeting each other's families. Whatever the scale, there was a future in your mind that included this person, and now that future has evaporated. You have to grieve not just what was, but what you thought would be. There's the loss of routine and structure. Humans are creatures of habit, and relationships create patterns that organize daily life. You texted them every morning. You had dinner together on Thursdays. You spent weekends a certain way. Your weeks had a rhythm that included them. When they're gone, yet that structure collapses. The spaces in your day that were filled with them are now empty, and empty space is uncomfortable. You feel the absence not as an abstract idea, but as literal gaps in time that you don't know how to fill. You're also losing shared history and context. This person knew things about you that no one else knows. They were there for experiences that shaped you. They remember the version of you that existed at different points in your life. When you lose them, you lose the only other witness to parts of your story. Inside jokes become meaningless. References that would have made them laugh land flat with other people. There's a loneliness in having memories that only the two of you shared and now only you carry. There's the loss of validation in the way they made you feel about yourself. If this person saw you in ways that felt affirming, if they appreciated qualities in you that others overlooked, if they made you feel attractive, interesting, worthy, losing them can feel like losing access to that version of yourself. You wonder if anyone else will ever see you that way. You wonder if those qualities were real or if they only existed in the specific chemistry between the two of you. You're grieving the loss of companionship and the end of loneliness that came from having someone who chose you. Humans have a deep need to be known and chosen by another person. When you had that and then lost it, the loneliness feels sharper than it did before the relationship because you know what it feels like not to be alone. You've tasted what it's like to have someone consistently present, and returning to solitude after that is jarring. There's also what psychologists call ambiguous loss, the grief that comes from losing someone who is still alive and accessible but no longer available to you in the way they were. They still exist out there somewhere, living their life, maybe happy, maybe with someone new. This creates a unique kind of pain because the person isn't gone in the absolute sense. You could probably reach out to them. You could look them up on social media. But doing so would only hurt you, so you're left in this strange state of knowing they exist while also trying to act as if they don't. If the ending was your choice, you're also grieving the version of them you wanted them to be. You're mourning the potential you saw in them, the relationship you hoped it could become if only they had changed or grown or met you halfway. This grief is complicated by guilt. You chose to leave, so do you even have the right to be sad? And by doubt. Did you give up too soon? Could it have worked if you'd tried harder? If the ending was their choice, you're grieving the rejection and what it means about your worth in their eyes. Being left forces you to confront painful questions. Why weren't you enough? What did you lack that made them choose to leave? What's wrong with you that made them decide you weren't worth staying for? These questions often have no good answers, but your brain asks them anyway, trying to make sense of being unwanted by someone you wanted. You're also grieving the loss of innocence if this relationship changed how you see love or trust. If you were betrayed, if promises were broken, if you were blindsided by the ending, you've lost not just this person, but also some of your ability to trust fully, to believe in permanence, to feel safe in vulnerability. That loss ripples forward into how you'll approach future relationships, adding a layer of grief that extends beyond this specific person. There's the loss of community if your social world was built around this relationship. Mutual friends who have drifted away or chosen sides. Activities and spaces you can no longer access because they're too connected to this person. Family members you were close to who are no longer part of your life. The end of a relationship can mean the end of an entire social ecosystem, which compounds the isolation and makes the world feel smaller and lonelier. Finally, you're grieving the time invested, the months or years you spent in this relationship, the energy you poured into making it work, the other opportunities you passed up because you were committed to this person. There's a sunk cost fallacy at work, where the amount invested makes it even harder to walk away, and after it ends, you're left wondering if all that time was wasted. Spoiler, it wasn't. Even painful experiences teach you things about yourself, about what you want and don't want, about how to love and be loved. But in the acute phase of grief, it feels like loss upon loss upon loss. Understanding that you're grieving multiple losses simultaneously helps explain why this is so overwhelming. You're not just sad about one thing, you're processing the end of a future, the loss of a companion, the death of shared routines, the absence of validation, the fracture of identity, and the collapse of hopes all at once. No wonder it feels impossible to just get over it. You're not getting over one loss, you're getting over many. The path forward requires acknowledging all of these losses, not just the obvious one. Each loss deserves its own grief, its own recognition. When you can name what you're actually mourning, the grief becomes more manageable because it's no longer one massive, undifferentiated pain. It's specific, and specific pain can be processed piece by piece until what remains is something you can carry without being crushed by it. Chapter 3. Breaking the Mental Loop. How to Stop Replaying the Past. One of the most exhausting aspects of not being able to let go is the mental loop. The constant replaying of memories, conversations, and moments from the relationship. You relive the good times and ache at their loss. You replay the bad times and dissect what went wrong. You analyze their words, their behavior, looking for hidden meanings or clues you missed. Your mind returns to this person over and over like a tongue probing a sore tooth, unable to leave it alone even though touching it hurts. This rumination is not a conscious choice. It's a cognitive process that happens when your brain is trying to solve a problem it perceives as urgent and unsolved. From your brain's perspective, at the end of an important relationship is a problem, a threat to your well-being that needs to be understood and resolved. So it keeps cycling through the available information, looking for the solution, the explanation, the thing you could have done differently that would have changed the outcome. The problem is that most of the time there is no solution to find. The relationship is over. The past cannot be changed. The person has made their choice or circumstances have made the choice for you, and no amount of mental replay will alter that reality. But your brain doesn't accept this easily. It keeps searching because that's what brains do when they encounter problems. They search for solutions. This is why rumination can feel both compulsive and futile. You can't stop doing it, but doing it achieves nothing. Research in psychology shows that rumination actually intensifies emotional pain rather than processing it. When you repeatedly think about the same distressing content without moving toward resolution, you're essentially re-traumatizing yourself. Each replay activates the same pain pathways in your brain, reinforcing the neural patterns associated with grief and loss. You're not working through the pain, you're wallowing in it, and there's a difference. Breaking the mental loop requires understanding the difference between productive reflection and destructive rumination. Productive reflection asks useful questions and moves toward insight. What did I learn from this? What patterns do I see in my behavior or choices? What do I want to do differently in the future? How can I take care of myself right now? And this type of thinking has a direction. It moves you forward. Rumination asks unanswerable questions and circles endlessly. Why did this happen? What if I had done things differently? How could they do this to me? Will I ever feel okay again? Do they think about me? These questions have no productive answers, and asking them keeps you stuck in the past, in the pain, in the powerlessness of circumstances you cannot change. One of the most effective techniques for interrupting rumination is cognitive diffusion, the practice of changing your relationship to your thoughts rather than trying to stop having them. You cannot simply decide to stop thinking about someone. Thought suppression doesn't work. Studies show that trying not to think about something makes you think about it more, a phenomenon called ironic process theory. Like the classic example, try not to think about a white bear and what happens. Your mind fills with white bears. Instead of trying to suppress thoughts of this person, practice observing them without engaging. When the thought arises, and it will, notice it. Say to yourself, there's a thought about them. Don't judge it. Don't follow it down the rabbit hole of memories and what-ifs. Just observe it like you'd observe a cloud passing in the sky. Let it be there without giving it your full attention and energy. This creates distance between you and the thought. The thought exists, but you are not the thought. Another powerful intervention is scheduled worry time. This sounds counterintuitive, but research shows it works. Set aside 15 minutes once or twice a day where you allow yourself to think about this person as much as you want. As during that time, ruminate freely. Write about them, replay memories, ask the unanswerable questions. But when the time is up, it's up. When thoughts of them arise outside of this scheduled time, acknowledge the thought and tell yourself, I'll think about this during my scheduled time. This gives your brain permission to process while also containing the rumination so it doesn't consume your entire day. Physical activity is another effective loop breaker because it's difficult to maintain deep rumination while your body is engaged in movement. When you're running, lifting, swimming, dancing, your mind has to focus at least partially on the physical task. This creates a break in the mental loop. Many people find that their clearest thinking and best insights come during or after exercise. Not because exercise solves the problem directly, but because it interrupts the unproductive cycling and allows new thoughts to emerge. Mindfulness meditation teaches you to notice when your mind has wandered into rumination and gently bring it back to the present moment. This is not about achieving a thought-free state. That's not realistic. It's about practicing the skill of noticing where your attention has gone and redirecting it. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to catch yourself before you fall into the full spiral of rumination. You start to notice the thought of them arising and can choose not to follow it down the familiar, painful path. Journaling can transform rumination into reflection. When you write, you externalize the thoughts circling in your head. You can see them on the page, which creates distance and often reveals patterns you couldn't see when the thoughts were just swirling internally. Ask yourself better questions in your writing. What am I feeling right now? What do I need? What would be helpful for me to do today? What am I learning about myself through this experience? These questions redirect your mental energy toward processing rather than looping. You can also challenge the rumination directly by examining the thoughts that keep recurring. Often, rumination is built on cognitive distortions, thinking errors that your brain makes when it's in distress. Catastrophizing. I'll never get over this. I'll never find anyone else. Black and white thinking. The relationship was either perfect or terrible. Personalization. This happened because I'm fundamentally flawed. When you can identify these distortions, you can question them. Is that actually true? What's the evidence? What would I tell a friend who was thinking this way? Finally, understand that breaking the mental loop is not about reaching a point where you never think about this person. It's about reaching a point where the thoughts don't hijack your entire day, where you can have the thought and then move on rather than spiraling, where you have agency over your attention rather than being at the mercy of wherever your mind wanders. The goal is not elimination. The goal is regulation, and regulation is a skill that improves with practice, even when it feels impossible at first. Chapter 4. The difference between missing them and missing the idea of them. Here's an uncomfortable question worth sitting with. Are you missing the actual person, or are you missing the version of them you wanted them to be? Are you grieving what was, or are you grieving what you hoped would happen? This distinction is crucial because mourning a real loss is different from mourning a fantasy, and the path forward depends on understanding which one you're dealing with. Memory is not a video recording that plays back events exactly as they occurred. Memory is reconstructive. Every time you recall something, your brain rebuilds the memory using whatever information is available, and that reconstruction is influenced by your current emotional state, your beliefs about the past, and what you need the memory to mean. This is why nostalgia can be so misleading. When you're missing someone, your brain has a tendency to edit the past, keeping the highlights and softening or erasing the painful parts. You remember the laughter but forget the fights. You remember the intimacy but forget the loneliness you felt even when you were together. You remember how they made you feel in the best moments, but forget how often those moments were followed by disappointment, confusion, or hurt. Your brain is doing what brains do when grieving. It's idealizing what's lost because idealization makes the loss more coherent. It's easier to mourn something perfect that you lost than to accept that you lost something deeply flawed that you were holding on to anyway. This is where honesty becomes essential. If you want to actually move forward, you have to look at the relationship as it really was, not as you wish it had been. This doesn't mean focusing only on the negative or convincing yourself that it was all bad. It means holding the full truth. The relationship had moments of genuine connection and joy, and it also had significant problems, unmet needs, incompatibilities, or patterns that made it ultimately unsustainable. Both things are true. A useful exercise is to write 2 lists. The first list, what you actually miss about this person. Be specific. Not I miss them, but I miss the way they made me coffee in the morning. I miss how they laughed at my jokes. I miss feeling like someone knew me. The second list, what you don't miss. The ways they hurt you, the times they let you down, the patterns that frustrated you, the needs they couldn't or wouldn't meet, and the ways the relationship limited you or made you feel small. Looking at both lists honestly often reveals something important. Some of what you miss can exist in other relationships. Someone else can make you laugh. Someone else can know you deeply. Someone else can make you feel valued and seen. These are not qualities unique to this specific person. They're qualities you can find again with someone better suited to you. What you don't miss, on the other hand, are often the core reasons the relationship needed to end. You don't miss the toxicity, the inconsistency, the incompatibility. You don't miss the ways it didn't work. There's also the question of whether you're missing the person or missing not being alone. Loneliness can be so painful that the memory of any companionship, even flawed companionship, it feels preferable to the present absence. But missing companionship in general is different from missing this specific person. If what you're really mourning is the end of loneliness, then the solution isn't getting this person back. It's building other forms of connection and learning to be more at peace with solitude. Another common trap is missing the potential rather than the reality. You're not missing who they actually were, but who you believed they could become, if only they changed, if only they committed more, if only they dealt with their issues, if only they loved you the way you loved them. This is mourning a fantasy. The person you're imagining didn't exist. The relationship you're grieving never happened. And grieving something that was never real in the first place keeps you stuck because you're chasing a ghost. The reality check here is hard but necessary. People are who they are. You cannot love someone into being different. You cannot want it enough for both of you. If this person wasn't able or willing to be what you needed them to be, that wasn't because you didn't try hard enough or love them enough. It was because they were who they were, and who they were wasn't compatible with what you needed. That's not a moral judgment on them or you, it's just incompatibility. Sometimes what you're missing is not the person but the role they played in your life. They were your confidant, your adventure partner, your source of validation, your distraction from other problems. Losing them means losing that function, and you're left with a gap. But here's the thing. Roles can be filled by other people or by developing new capabilities in yourself. You can build other sources of validation. You can learn to be your own source of comfort. You can create new adventures. The specific person isn't irreplaceable. Right? The function they served is what you're struggling to replace. There's also the seduction of the narrative where you were meant to be together. That this person was the one. That you'll never find what you had with them again. This story feels true in grief, but it's worth questioning. If you were truly meant to be together, you would be. If they were truly the one, the relationship wouldn't have ended or wouldn't have been as dysfunctional as it was. The story of meant to be is comforting because it makes the loss feel cosmically significant, but it also traps you in the idea that this was your only chance at that kind of connection, which is almost never actually true. Distinguishing between missing the actual person and missing the idea requires brutal honesty with yourself. It requires looking at the relationship without the rose-colored glasses of nostalgia. It requires accepting that some of what you're grieving was never real in the first place. And it requires trusting that the qualities you loved in this person, the feelings you had, the connection you experienced, all of that can exist again with someone who is actually right for you. Someone who doesn't require you to ignore red flags or suppress your needs or accept less than you deserve. You miss them. That's real. But what exactly are you missing? That question deserves an honest answer. Because the answer determines what you're actually mourning and what you need to heal. Chapter 5. Reclaiming your mental space. Taking back your thoughts. When someone occupies your thoughts constantly, they're not just taking up mental real estate, they're crowding out everything else. Your capacity for attention is finite. Every minute you spend thinking about them is a minute not spent on work, relationships, hobbies, growth, or being present in your actual life. This isn't just emotionally exhausting. It's a form of mental captivity where someone who is no longer in your life still controls your internal world. Reclaiming your mental space doesn't mean forcing yourself to never think about them. It means reducing the amount of time they occupy your thoughts from constant to occasional, from overwhelming to manageable. It means taking back control over your attention so that you decide what you focus on rather than having your mind hijacked by someone who's gone. The first step is creating physical and digital distance. If you're still following them on social media, stop. Mute them. Unfollow them. Block them if necessary. Every time you see what they're doing, who they're with, or how they're living their life without you, you're reopening the wound. Social media creates the illusion of continued connection, while actually just providing a steady stream of triggers that keep you stuck. You cannot heal while actively monitoring their life. Delete the photos, or at minimum, archive them somewhere you can't casually access. Delete the text threads or move them to a folder you don't see. Remove the playlist they made you. Get rid of the things that serve as constant reminders. This isn't about pretending they never existed. It's about not surrounding yourself with artifacts that pull your attention back to them every time you look at your phone or your wall. You can revisit these things later if you want. Right now, they're obstacles to healing. You also need to stop checking on them. Stop asking mutual friends about them. Stop creating reasons to think about them. Every time you seek information about their life, you're feeding the part of your brain that's trying to maintain the connection. You're giving yourself a small hit of something that feels like closeness but is actually just prolonging your attachment. The information you get will either hurt you because they're doing fine without you or hurt you because they're struggling. Either way, it doesn't help you move forward, but distance alone isn't enough. You also need to actively redirect your attention toward things that fill the space they occupied. This is where intentionality matters. Your brain won't just naturally stop thinking about them because you've created distance. It will keep defaulting to familiar patterns unless you give it new patterns to follow. You have to consciously build a life that's engaging enough to capture your attention. This is not about distraction in the shallow sense, mindlessly scrolling social media or binge-watching shows to avoid feeling. It's about engagement, activities that genuinely require and deserve your attention. Pick up hobbies you abandoned. Start projects you've been putting off. Deepen friendships that have been neglected. Physical activity, creative work, learning something new, helping others. These are forms of engagement that fill mental space with something other than rumination. There's also the practice of attention training. When you notice your thoughts drifting to this person, you have a choice. Follow the thought down the familiar path of rumination, or redirect your attention to something else. The redirecting is a skill that gets stronger with practice. At first it feels impossible, like the pull back to thoughts of them is too strong. But every time you successfully redirect, you're weakening that neural pathway and strengthening alternative ones. A practical technique. When the thought of them arises, immediately name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. This grounding exercise pulls your attention into the present moment and out of rumination. You're training your brain to operate in the here and now rather than in the past or in fantasy. Meditation is also powerful for reclaiming mental space because it teaches you that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts arise. You notice them. They pass. You don't have to grab onto every thought and follow it. You can let thoughts of this person come and go without engaging with them, without building stories around them, without letting them derail your attention. This is not suppression. It's non-attachment. The thought exists, but you don't have to do anything with it. Another dimension. Reclaim the physical spaces that were shared. If there are places you avoid because they remind you of them, you gradually reintroduce yourself to those places with new associations. Go to that restaurant with a friend. Visit that park and create new memories there. Take back the spaces that have become emotional landmines. This is not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let the past control your present geography. You also need to fill the time that was occupied by them. If you used to spend evenings texting them or weekends together, those are now gaps in your schedule. Empty time is dangerous because it's when rumination is strongest. Structure your time deliberately. Make plans. Commit to activities. Fill your calendar with things that require your presence and attention, not as avoidance, but as active life building. Reclaiming your mental space also means reclaiming your identity outside of this relationship. Who were you before them? Who are you now without them? What parts of yourself did you lose or suppress during the relationship? What interests did you neglect? What friendships did you let fade? Reconnecting with these aspects of yourself gives you an identity that's not built around someone else. It reminds you that you are whole without them. Finally, understand that this is a process. You won't reclaim your mental space in a day or a week. There will be setbacks. Days when they occupy your thoughts as intensely as ever. Days when you slip and check their social media, or drive by their house, or send a text you regret. These setbacks are not failures, they're part of the process. What matters is the overall trajectory, not any single day. Are you thinking about them less this month than last month? Is the intensity of the thoughts decreasing even if the frequency hasn't? Are there hours or even days where they barely cross your mind? That's progress. Your mental space is yours. It belongs to you, not to someone who's no longer in your life. Take it back. Gently, patiently, deliberately. Fill it with things that matter, with people who are present, with a life that's happening right now rather than in memory or fantasy. That's how you move forward, not by forgetting them, but by making them a smaller part of a much bigger, fuller life. Chapter 6. The Role of Time. What healing actually looks like. Time heals all wounds is one of the most commonly offered pieces of advice after loss, and it's both true and misleading. True because time is necessary for healing. Grief cannot be rushed, and emotional processing happens on its own schedule. Misleading because time alone doesn't heal. What heals is what you do with the time. Passive waiting while staying stuck in the same patterns doesn't produce healing. Active processing while moving forward does. Healing from loss is not linear. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the role of time. You don't feel terrible for weeks, then gradually better each day until you're fine. You have good days and terrible days, often without any clear trigger for why today is harder than yesterday. You might go a week without thinking about them much, then have a day where the grief feels as fresh as it did at the beginning. This is normal. This is not regression. This is how emotional processing actually works. Psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, that have become widely known. But these stages are not a neat sequence you move through once, and then you're done. You cycle through them multiple times. You might be in acceptance one day and back in anger the next. You might bargain for months, then feel depressed, then find yourself denying the reality all over again. The stages are real, but they're not linear steps. They're states you move in and out of as you process the loss. Research on grief suggests that acute grief and the most intense, all-consuming phase typically lasts between 6 months and 2 years for major losses, though this varies widely based on the depth of the attachment and the circumstances of the loss. During this acute phase, the grief is likely to be a constant presence, affecting your sleep, appetite, concentration, and baseline mood. This is not a problem to fix. It's a natural response to significant loss that your body and mind need to move through. After the acute phase, grief doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes integrated grief, something you carry with you that has less intensity and less frequency but still exists. You might have moments months or years later where you miss this person acutely, where a song or a smell brings them flooding back. These moments become less frequent and less devastating over time, yet but they don't stop entirely. And that's okay. The goal is not to stop feeling anything. The goal is to reach a place where the feelings don't control your life. What helps healing happen during this time? First, allowing yourself to feel the full range of emotions without judgment. Grief is not just sadness. It's anger at them for leaving or for how things ended. It's guilt about your role in the relationship's failure. It's relief if the relationship was difficult. It's fear about the future. It's longing. It's regret. It's confusion. All of these emotions are valid. Trying to suppress them or rush through them actually prolongs the process. Feeling them fully, letting them move through you, is what allows them to eventually pass. Second, talking about it helps. not obsessively, not to the point where you're boring your friends with the same story on repeat, but processing loss verbally with people you trust accelerates healing. There's something about putting experience into words that helps the brain organize and integrate it. Therapy can be especially valuable here because a good therapist provides a space to process grief without the social pressure of not being too much or taking too long to get over it. Third, self compassion is essential. The way you talk to yourself during this time matters enormously. If you're constantly judging yourself for not being over it yet, for still thinking about them, for having setbacks, you're adding a second layer of suffering on top of the grief itself. Practice speaking to yourself the way you'd speak to a friend going through the same thing, with kindness, with patience, with understanding that healing takes as long as it takes. Fourth, maintaining basic functioning helps even when it feels pointless. Keep eating, even if food doesn't taste like anything. Keep sleeping, or at least resting. Keep moving your body. Keep showing up for work or school. Keep basic social contact even when you want to isolate. These maintenance behaviors might not feel like they're helping, but they prevent you from spiraling deeper into depression, and they maintain the infrastructure of your life that you'll need when you start feeling better. Fifth, be wary of numbing behaviors. Alcohol, drugs, excessive sleeping, binge eating, compulsive shopping, serial dating. These are common attempts to escape the pain of grief. They work temporarily, but they prevent actual processing. When you numb the pain, you also numb the healing. The grief is still there when the numbness wears off, except now you've wasted time and possibly created new problems. Feel the feelings. They won't kill you, even though they might feel like they will. Sixth, milestones help mark progress even when day-to-day changes are invisible. The first time you go a full day without thinking about them. The first time you see a couple being affectionate and don't feel that knife in your chest. The first time you can look at old photos without crying. The first time you genuinely laugh at something. These milestones remind you that healing is happening even when it feels impossibly slow. Seventh, anniversaries and triggers will be hard, and that's normal. The first birthday without them. The first holiday. The anniversary of when you met or when you broke up. Like the song that was yours. The place you used to go together. These will hit you hard even if you've been doing well. Expect it. Plan for it. Be gentle with yourself on those days. They're not evidence that you're not healing. They're evidence that this person mattered, and loss of things that matter is painful. Eighth, there will come a point where the balance shifts, where you've spent more time without them than with them, where more of your life has happened since they left than when they were present, where your identity has been rebuilt around their absence rather than their presence. This shift is gradual and you might not notice it happening, but one day you'll realize that you've gone a week or a month barely thinking about them, that you're invested in new things and new people, that your life has filled in the space they left. Time is not the healer. You are. Time is just the space in which you do the healing. What matters is what you do in that space, whether you allow yourself to feel, whether you process or suppress, whether you build a new life or stay stuck waiting for the old one to return. Use the time well. Be patient with yourself. Trust that the pain won't last forever, even when it feels like it will. And one day you'll notice that it hurts less, that you think about them less, that you're okay, truly okay, in a way you didn't think you'd ever be again. Chapter 7. Rediscovering who you are. Without them. One of the most disorienting aspects of losing someone significant is the identity crisis that follows. For months or years, part of who you were was defined in relation to them. You were someone's partner, someone's best friend, part of a we rather than just an I. When they're gone, that relational identity collapses, and you're left wondering who you are without them. This isn't weakness or dependence. It's how identity works in the context of close relationships. We define ourselves partly through our connections with others. The work of rediscovering yourself is not about returning to who you were before them. You're not the same person you were before the relationship. You've been changed by the experience, by the love and the loss, and trying to go backward isn't possible or productive. The work is about integrating who you were, who you became during the relationship, and who you're becoming now into a coherent sense of self that exists independently of them. Start by asking, what parts of yourself did you lose or suppress during the relationship? In any relationship, there are compromises. You give up some freedom, some independence, some individual pursuits to make room for togetherness. Sometimes those compromises are healthy. Sometimes they cross into self-abandonment. You stopped doing things you loved because they weren't interested. You changed aspects of yourself to be more acceptable to them. You made yourself smaller to avoid conflict or rejection. Now is the time to reclaim those parts. The hobbies you stopped pursuing, the friendships you let fade, or the interests that didn't align with theirs. The version of yourself that existed before you started performing for their approval. This isn't about blaming them for changes you made. You made those choices, even if they felt compelled. It's about recognizing that those choices no longer serve you and you can now choose differently. Spend time alone. Not just being physically alone, but actually being alone. Without filling every moment with noise, distraction, or other people. Silence and solitude are uncomfortable at first, especially when you're raw from loss. But they're necessary. In the quiet, you start to hear your own voice again, rather than the internalized voice of them or the relationship. You start to notice what you actually want, rather than what you learn to want in relation to someone else. Ask yourself questions you might not have asked in a long time. What do I actually enjoy? Not what did we enjoy together, but what lights me up independently. What do I value? What matters to me? What do I want my life to look like? How do I want to spend my time? What kind of person do I want to be? These questions don't have immediate answers, but sitting with them begins the process of rebuilding identity from the inside out rather than from external validation or relational definition. Try new things. This isn't just distraction, it's identity exploration. Take a class in something you've always been curious about. Travel somewhere you've never been, even if it's just a day trip to a nearby town. Read books in genres you've never explored. Meet new people through activities or communities you've never engaged with. Each new experience gives you data about who you are now, what resonates with you, what doesn't. Identity isn't static. It's built through experience and reflection on experience. Pay attention to moments when you feel most yourself. Not performing, not adapting to someone else's expectations, not playing a role. Just being. What are you doing in those moments? Who are you with? What qualities are you expressing? These moments are clues to your authentic self, the version of you that exists beneath all the social conditioning and relational adaptations. Reconnect with old friends, especially those who knew you before this relationship. They carry memories of who you were then, which can help you remember aspects of yourself you've lost touch with. They can reflect back qualities you might have forgotten you possess. Yet they can remind you that you existed fully before this person came into your life, and you can exist fully after they've left it. Be wary of immediately jumping into a new relationship. The temptation is strong. Another person can fill the void, can provide distraction from grief, can make you feel wanted and valued again. But if you haven't done the work of rediscovering who you are alone, you'll just import all the unresolved issues and unhealed wounds into the new relationship. You'll define yourself in relation to this new person without ever having established who you are independently. The pattern will repeat. Create new rituals and routines that are entirely yours. Maybe you cook a meal you love every Sunday. Maybe you take yourself to a movie once a month. Maybe you have a morning routine that's just for you. These rituals create structure that's not dependent on anyone else. They're small declarations of independence. I can care for myself. I can create a good life on my own terms. Therapy or coaching can accelerate this process of self-discovery because a skilled therapist asks the questions you might not ask yourself and notices patterns you can't see from inside your own experience. They hold up a mirror that shows you who you're being, not just who you think you are or who you're trying to be. And they provide a space to explore identity without judgment or agenda. Physical changes can also signal and support internal shifts. A new haircut, a change in style, reorganizing your living space. Even something as simple as buying new sheets that they never slept on. These external changes create a boundary between who you were then and who you're becoming now. They're not magic, but they're rituals that mark transition. Rediscovering yourself also means developing a more robust sense of self-worth that's not dependent on being chosen by someone else. When you base your worth on being loved by a specific person, losing that person feels like losing your value. Building self-worth that comes from within, from your values, your integrity, your capabilities, your kindness, makes you less vulnerable to being destroyed by loss. You can be rejected by one person and still know your worth because your worth isn't determined by them. This is also the time to examine your patterns. Why did you choose this person? What were you seeking in the relationship? What needs were you trying to meet? What fears or insecurities drove your behavior? Understanding these patterns helps you make different choices in the future. It helps you see yourself more clearly, not to judge or criticize, but to understand. Over time, what emerges is a version of you that has been through loss and integrated it. You're not the same person you were before them, and you're not defined by them anymore. You're someone who loved and lost and survived and learned. Someone who can stand on their own. Someone who knows who they are independent of who loves them. That's not a consolation prize for losing them. That's the foundation for everything good that comes next. Chapter 8. Forgiveness, not for them, but for you. Forgiveness is one of the most misunderstood concepts in healing from loss. Many people believe that forgiveness means condoning what happened, accepting mistreatment, or letting someone off the hook for hurt they caused. It doesn't. Forgiveness is not about them. It's about you. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of resentment, anger, and bitterness that keeps you chained to someone who's no longer in your life. When you hold on to anger and resentment, you're giving this person continued power over your emotional state. They're gone, living their life, possibly not thinking about you at all. And you're still carrying the weight of what they did, rehashing it, stewing in it, letting it poison your present. The anger feels justified, and maybe it is justified, but justified anger that you carry for years still damages you. It doesn't damage them, it damages you. Research in psychology shows that chronic anger and resentment have measurable negative effects on physical and mental health. Elevated cortisol, increased inflammation, higher blood pressure, depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping. Holding a grudge is literally bad for your health. The person you're refusing to forgive is not suffering from your refusal. You are. This is why forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not them. But how do you forgive someone who hurt you deeply? Someone who broke promises, betrayed trust, abandoned you, or caused pain that still echoes? The process begins with understanding what forgiveness actually is and isn't. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. Forgiveness is not forgetting. You remember what happened. You just choose not to let it control you. Forgiveness is not saying it was okay. It wasn't okay. Forgiveness is saying, I'm not going to let this keep destroying me. Start by acknowledging the full extent of the hurt. Don't minimize it. Don't rationalize it. Don't rush past it. They hurt you. They let you down. They didn't show up the way you needed them to. Maybe they were cruel. Maybe they were neglectful. Maybe they chose someone else. Maybe they just stopped loving you. Whatever happened, it hurt. That hurt is valid. You don't have to pretend it wasn't as bad as it was. In fact, you have to feel the full weight of it before you can release it. Write a letter you'll never send. Put everything in it. All the anger, all the pain, all the things you wish you'd said, all the ways they failed you. Don't hold back. This is for you, not them. Get it all out onto the page. This externalization is important because it moves the resentment from inside you to outside you, where you can see it, examine it, and eventually let it go. Then try to understand, which is different from excusing. Understanding why someone behaved the way they did doesn't make it okay, but it can soften the anger. Maybe they were dealing with their own trauma, their own limitations, their own fears. Maybe they didn't have the emotional capacity to be what you needed. Maybe they were doing the best they could with the tools they had, and their best just wasn't good enough. Understanding doesn't erase the harm, but it can shift it from personal attack to human limitation. They weren't trying to destroy you. They were just incapable of being what you needed. Recognize your own role without falling into self-blame. Most relationship failures involve two people. You weren't perfect either. You made mistakes. You had limitations. Acknowledging this isn't about taking responsibility for their bad behavior. It's about seeing the situation more completely. When you can hold both truths, they hurt you and you weren't perfect. Forgiveness becomes easier because you're not locked into the rigid narrative of villain and victim. Sometimes forgiveness requires forgiving yourself as much as forgiving them. Forgiving yourself for staying too long, for ignoring red flags, for giving chance after chance, for believing in potential that was never realized, for loving someone who couldn't love you back the way you needed. You did the best you could with what you knew at the time. You're allowed to have made mistakes. You're allowed to have been wrong about them. That doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human. Understand that forgiveness is a process, not a moment. You don't wake up one day and decide to forgive and then it's done. You forgive in layers. Some days you'll feel genuinely at peace with what happened. Other days the anger will surge back. That's normal. Forgiveness isn't achieved once and then maintained effortlessly. It's a practice you return to again and again until eventually the returns become less frequent and less intense. One powerful practice is loving kindness meditation, directed toward the person who hurt you. This sounds impossible when you're in the thick of anger, but research shows it works. You sit quietly and silently repeat phrases like, "May you be happy," "May you be healthy," "May you be at peace." At first, this will feel false or even enraging. How dare I wish them well after what they did? But over time, this practice softens the grip of resentment. It's not about them deserving your kind wishes. It's about freeing yourself from the toxicity of wishing them harm. You might also need to forgive them for things they can never apologize for because they don't see what they did as wrong, or because they're no longer in your life to apologize, or because they're incapable of the self-awareness required to understand the harm they caused. Waiting for an apology that will never come keeps you in a state of suspended grievance. You have to find a way to release it without their participation in that release. Now, there's also the question of whether you tell them you forgive them. Sometimes that's healing. It creates closure, it clears the air, it allows both people to move forward. Sometimes it's unnecessary or even harmful. It reopens contact you've worked hard to close. It gives them emotional access they no longer deserve. It invites them back into your mental space. Forgiveness doesn't require their knowledge or participation. You can forgive someone entirely in your own heart and mind without ever telling them. Finally, understand that forgiveness doesn't mean trust. You can forgive someone for how they hurt you while also maintaining clear boundaries that protect you from being hurt again. You can forgive and still choose never to let them back into your life. Forgiveness is about releasing the past. And boundaries are about protecting the future. Both are necessary. When you finally forgive, really forgive, not just intellectually, but in your body and heart, you'll feel it. The weight lifts. The obsessive thinking decreases. You can think about them without that spike of anger or pain. You can remember what was good without being destroyed by what was bad. You're free. Not because they changed or apologized or earned it, but because you chose to free yourself from carrying them. Chapter 9. Building a life that doesn't revolve around loss. At some point in the healing process, you have to make a fundamental shift from processing the past to building the future. You cannot heal your way into a good life solely by working through grief. At a certain point, you have to start actively constructing something new, relationships, goals, routines, meaning, that fills the space that loss created and gives you something to move toward rather than something to move away from. This doesn't mean rushing to replace what you lost or pretending the loss didn't happen. It means recognizing that grief work has a natural endpoint where continuing to focus on the loss becomes avoidance of living. You can spend years perfectly understanding your grief, analyzing the relationship, and processing your feelings, and still be stuck because you haven't built anything new. At some point, understanding must translate into action. Building a life that doesn't revolve around loss requires reimagining your future without this person in it. For a long time, your future probably included them. Your plans, your goals, your vision of what life would look like. They were in it. Now you need a new vision. Not just the absence of the old vision, but an actual new picture of what you're building toward. What do you want? Not what did you want with them, but what do you want for yourself? Set goals that have nothing to do with them or the relationship. Professional goals, the career move you've been considering, the skill you want to develop. Personal goals, the place you want to visit, the physical challenge you want to accomplish. Yet creative goals, the thing you want to make or learn. Social goals, the friendships you want to deepen. These goals give you something to work toward that's forward-facing. They organize your energy around creation rather than loss. Invest in relationships that are present and reciprocal. One of the reasons people stay stuck on someone who's gone is because there's a relational void that isn't being filled. Humans need connection. If all your relational energy is still directed towards someone who's not there, you're starving the connections that could actually sustain you. Reach out to friends, deepen existing relationships, build new ones, join communities, show up for people who show up for you. Create structure and routine that's yours. During the relationship, your routine probably revolved partly around them. Morning texts, weekly plans, shared rituals. Now you need new structure that's independent. A morning routine that sets the tone for your day, weekly commitments that you look forward to, rituals that are just yours. Structure provides stability and reduces the mental space available for rumination because you're engaged in the architecture of daily life. Find meaning through contribution. Research on well-being consistently shows that one of the most reliable sources of life satisfaction is contributing to something beyond yourself. Volunteer. Mentor someone. Help a friend with a project. Engage in work that makes a difference. When you're focused on being useful to others, you're less focused on your own pain. And the meaning that comes from contribution fills the existential void that loss can create. Engage with beauty, art, nature. These experiences pull you into presence and awe in ways that interrupt the inward focus of grief. A concert, a museum, a hike, a sunset, a well-written book. These moments of transcendence remind you that the world is large and beautiful and full of things that have nothing to do with your loss. They restore perspective. Physical challenges help too. Training for something difficult, a marathon, a climbing route, a long-distance bike ride, gives you a concrete goal that requires discipline and effort and produces visible progress. The sense of agency and accomplishment that comes from meeting physical challenges translates into emotional resilience. You prove to yourself that you can do hard things, that you can set a goal and achieve it, that you're strong. Learn something completely new, a language, an instrument, a craft. Learning creates new neural pathways, new competencies, new aspects of identity. It's impossible to ruminate deeply while genuinely engaged in learning because learning requires attention. And the growth that comes from developing new skills is incompatible with the stagnation of staying stuck in loss. Date when you're ready, not to fill the void, but to explore connection with someone new. There's no timeline for when you should be ready to date again. Some people need months, others need years. The marker isn't time past, but internal state. Are you looking for someone to fix you or complete you? Not ready. Are you looking for someone to share a life you're already building? Ready. The difference is whether you're seeking salvation or companionship. When you do date, be honest about where you are. You don't need to trauma dump on a first date, but you also don't need to pretend you're more healed than you are. The right person will have space for the fact that you're still processing something. The wrong person will need you to be perfectly over it before they can engage with you. Let them self-select out. Practice gratitude, not for the loss, but for what remains and what's emerging. Research shows that regular gratitude practice rewires the brain toward noticing positive things. It's a counter to the negativity bias that grief amplifies. Each day, name 3 things you're grateful for. Not big things necessarily, small things. The coffee you enjoyed, the friend who texted, the sunlight on your face. Training your attention toward what's good doesn't erase what's hard. It just makes what's hard not the only thing you see. Must celebrate milestones of moving forward. The first time you went a full week without crying. The first social event you attended and actually enjoyed. The first date that felt promising. The first time you woke up and they weren't your first thought. These milestones deserve recognition. They're evidence that you're healing, that you're building something new, that loss is not the end of your story. Building a life that doesn't revolve around loss doesn't mean the loss disappears or stops mattering. It means the loss becomes one part of a much larger, richer life. A chapter that shaped you, taught you, changed you. But not the whole book. The rest of the book is still being written. And what comes next is yours to create. Chapter 10. When the memory remains, living with what was without being haunted by it. Here's the paradox of letting go. You never fully let go. Not if the connection was real and deep. They become part of your story, woven into the fabric of who you are. The memories don't disappear. The impact they had on you doesn't vanish. What changes is your relationship to those memories and that impact. You learn to carry them without being crushed by them. You learn to remember without being destroyed by remembering. The goal is not to erase this person from your history or pretend they didn't matter. The goal is integration, taking what was, what you felt, what you learned, and incorporating it into your ongoing life in a way that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. They were significant, they shaped you, and now they're gone. All of these things are true simultaneously. Integration means being able to think about them without the thought hijacking your entire day. You can remember something good and smile without spiraling into grief about the fact that it's over. You can acknowledge something they taught you without wishing they were still here to teach you more. The memory exists. It's allowed to exist, but it doesn't control you. It also means being able to hold complexity. They weren't all good or all bad. The relationship wasn't perfect or completely terrible. You can remember the love without ignoring the pain. You can acknowledge the pain without erasing the love. Both existed. Both shaped you. Mature grief allows for nuance in a way that acute grief doesn't. In the beginning, you need simple stories. They were perfect, and I lost them. Or they were terrible, and I'm better off. Integration allows for the truth, which is almost always more complicated. You'll know you've reached integration when you can talk about them without emotion flooding you. When you can see something that reminds you of them and feel a gentle pang, rather than a knife in the chest. When you can wish them well without bitterness or hope for reconciliation. When they're a person you once knew and loved, rather than the person who defines your present emotional state. There will still be moments where the grief resurfaces. A song, a place, an anniversary, a reminder that catches you off guard. These moments are not regression. They're not evidence that you haven't healed. They're evidence that this person mattered, and people who matter leave marks. The difference is that these moments pass. They don't derail you for days or weeks. You feel the sadness, you acknowledge it, and then you continue with your life. Living with the memory also means extracting the lessons. Every relationship, even the painful ones, teaches you something about yourself, about what you need, about what you're willing to tolerate, about how you show up in intimacy. What did this relationship teach you? Not in the abstract, but specifically. Maybe it taught you to pay attention to red flags. Maybe it taught you what you actually need from a partner. Maybe it taught you your own capacity for love or resilience or forgiveness. These lessons become part of who you are going forward. It might also mean being able to feel gratitude for what was, even though it ended. Not immediately. Gratitude comes late in the grief process, if at all. But eventually, you might be able to see that this person gave you things that mattered. They were there during a time when you needed someone. They taught you things about yourself. They showed you what connection could feel like. The fact that it ended doesn't erase what it was. You're allowed to be grateful for that while also being grateful it's over if that's true. Living with memory without being haunted means accepting that they'll always be part of your story, but they don't have to be part of your future. They're in the chapters you've already written. They're not in the ones you're writing now. There's a finality to that which is both sad and freeing. Sad because it means truly accepting they're gone. Freeing because it means you can finally stop waiting, stop hoping, stop carrying them into every new day. If you have children together or share practical responsibilities, living with the memory gets more complex because they're not fully gone from your life. You still have to interact, coordinate, maybe even see them regularly. This requires a different kind of letting go, not of the person, but of the role they played, the relationship you had, the future you imagined. You shift from intimate partner to co-parent or whatever the practical relationship requires. This is harder in some ways and easier in others. Harder because you can't have full distance. Easier because you're forced to practice neutrality regularly, which accelerates emotional detachment. You might also wonder if you'll ever stop comparing future relationships to this one. The answer is yes, eventually. New love creates its own memories, its own reference points. The longer you're away from this relationship and the deeper you go into new ones, the less this person serves as the standard. They become one relationship among several, special in some ways, but not the only framework you have for understanding love. Living with memory without haunting also means protecting yourself from reopening the wound. This means not checking their social media, not reaching out when you're lonely, not keeping doors open that should be closed. The memory can exist without active connection to the person. In fact, healing often requires that the memory exist without the person. You remember who they were and what they meant without needing ongoing contact to keep that memory alive. Finally, living with what was means trusting that it was real, even though it ended. One of the most painful thoughts that accompanies loss is the fear that what you felt wasn't real, that it was one-sided, that you imagined the depth of the connection. This doubt is normal but usually inaccurate. It was real. They felt something too, even if they left, even if they chose someone else, even if it ultimately wasn't enough to sustain the relationship. What you experienced was real. You're allowed to trust that and carry it forward as evidence of your capacity to connect deeply. That capacity didn't die with the relationship. It's still there, waiting for someone worthy of it. The memory remains. That's okay. You don't have to let go of remembering. You just have to let go of being controlled by remembering. You carry them as part of your history, your growth, your understanding of love and loss. And then you live your life. A full, rich, forward-moving life that they shaped but don't define. That's what letting go actually looks like. Not forgetting, not erasing, just moving forward while carrying what was with grace instead of with grief that destroys you. There is a version of you on the other side of this loss. A version that has processed the grief, integrated the lessons, and built a life that includes but is not defined by what happened. You cannot see that person yet because you're still in the middle of becoming them. But they exist, waiting for you at the end of this journey. That person is not the same as who you were before this loss. You can't undo the experience of loving someone and losing them. You can't return to innocence once you've been through heartbreak. But the person you become is not diminished by the loss, they're deepened by it. More compassionate because they've suffered. More resilient because they've survived. More discerning because they've learned what truly matters. They understand love differently. Not more cynically. Cynicism is just disappointment dressed up as wisdom. But more realistically, they know that love doesn't guarantee permanence, that you can love someone deeply and still not be right for each other, that endings don't erase what was real, that you can survive losing someone you thought you couldn't live without. These understandings make future love more grounded, more honest, more sustainable. They also know themselves better. Going through loss and coming out the other side requires self-examination that most people avoid. You've had to look at your patterns, your needs, your role in what went wrong. You've had to sit with yourself in ways that are uncomfortable but necessary. That work produces self-knowledge that will serve you in every relationship, every decision, every challenge you face going forward. The person you become is also braver, not because they don't feel fear, they do, but because they've done hard things. They've sat with unbearable pain and discovered it was bearable. They've faced the fear that they'd never be okay again and proved it wrong. They know that they can be broken and put themselves back together. That knowledge makes you less afraid of future risks because you know you can survive even if things don't work out. They're more present. Loss has a way of clarifying what matters. The trivial concerns that used to consume your attention seem smaller now. You appreciate the people who are actually in your life instead of taking them for granted. You notice beauty more readily because you understand impermanence. You live more in the moment because you understand viscerally that nothing is guaranteed. That future version of you also carries this person differently. Not as an open wound, but as a scar. Still visible, still part of your story, but healed. You can talk about them without crying. You can remember the good without being destroyed by the fact that it's over. You can acknowledge what they meant while also being genuinely invested in your present life. They're a chapter, an important one, but not the whole book. The journey from where you are now to that future version is not linear. There will be setbacks, days where the grief feels fresh again, moments where you doubt you're making progress, times when you're tempted to reach out, to check on them, to reopen what you've worked so hard to close. These moments are part of the process, not evidence that the process isn't working. Healing is messy. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes 3 steps back, but the overall trajectory is forward. You will get through this. Not because the pain isn't real or because this person didn't matter, but because you are more than this loss. You are more than this relationship. You are more than the grief that currently feels like it defines you. And the capacity you had to love them deeply is still there. It didn't disappear when they did. It's just waiting to be directed towards someone who will stay, who will meet you where you are, who will choose you consistently. One day, and you won't see it coming, you'll realize that you haven't thought about them in days, or that you did think about them, but it didn't hurt the way it used to, or that you can genuinely imagine a future that doesn't include them, and that future looks good. These moments will arrive quietly without announcement, and you'll realize that somewhere along the way, without noticing the exact moment it happened, you let go. Not all at once, not completely, but enough. Enough that they no longer control your emotional state. Enough that you can live fully in your present instead of being haunted by the past. Enough that you're free to build something new without their shadow over it. That's what's waiting for you. Not forgetting them or erasing what they meant. Just freedom from being consumed by their absence. The ability to remember them with gentleness instead of pain. The capacity to carry what was while fully inhabiting what is. That's letting go. And it's available to you on the other side of the work you're doing right now. Keep going, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Feel the feelings. Process the loss. Be gentle with yourself. Build a life that's worth living. And trust that one day, maybe soon, maybe not yet, you'll wake up and realize that you're okay. Truly okay. In a way you didn't think you'd ever be again. That day is coming. Keep walking toward it.